Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we're joined by Vito, Calise, and Jonathan Barron from the Meet at the Apple podcast. We talk about the atmosphere at Citi Field and much more. Of course, Joe and I recap our Subway Series trip and an eventful weekend against the Astros and what lies ahead for the Mets, who are now right in the thick of this wild card race. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a question for our mailbag segment with that review. Watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMeo. And Joe, the week that was an eventful one. You and I were at the ballpark Tuesday against the Yankees, and the Mets just absolutely clobbered their crosstown rival in a two-game stretch. An eventful weekend against the Astros and a good start in game one on the road in D.C. So, Joe, let's start with the Mets versus Yankees. I mean, what a scene at Citi Field, right? It was mobbed. Obviously, there was a ton of Yankee fans there, but the Met fans were loud, and the team has been giving them a reason to be loud so far.
It felt like playoff baseball. It felt like what the Subway Series should feel like, because there's been years where the Subway Series just hasn't really felt like it had that juice. I think it's just a perfect storm of the Yankees obviously being one of the better teams in baseball, even though they had a tough stretch coming into the series. The Mets playing like the best team in baseball just brought extra environment there. And, obviously had a great time doing the show. So thank you to SNY for setting that up. Thank you to everyone who came by. There was a bunch of people watching us do our thing. A few people came on and asked questions. And yeah, it was a great environment. And as a Cowboys fan, I didn't think I would become friends of the show with Tiki Barber, but that's something that happened. And just good to see the Mets really take it to Big Brother last week.
It really was a great time, of course, hanging out with the guys from WFAN, and a great time with our listeners that stop by for the show. We really, really appreciate whenever we get to meet you guys, interact, or you could jump on the show because of the live shows. We have the third microphone, which is my favorite aspect of when we get to do the live shows, Joe, whether it's at the QBC, whether it's right in front of Citi Field. It's a really, really good time. And what's an even better time, Joe, and that's a hard bar to top, is that the Mets are completely alive. And it is, obviously the mainstays are a big part of this, right? Francisco Lindor is thriving in the leadoff spot. How many times can we talk about that? Brandon Nimmo's hit home runs. Sounds like Brandon Nimmo's all right after a little scare in a hotel room. JD Martinez looks every bit of the guy we've watched hit baseballs for a long, long time. But the duo of Francisco Alvarez and Mark Vientos right now, the contributions from Jose Iglesias, who is just, he wasn't even in the major leagues in 2023. And the spark he's given this club and the starting pitching so far, Joe. We will get into the bullpen, but we have to start with what's been good so far. The offense and the starting pitching, for the most part, has completely propelled this team right on the outside looking in at the wild card, where they can almost feel it. They've been hovering a game out now for quite some time. And officially, as we sit here and record, the team is 41-41, thanks to the hottest June in baseball.
The good players are playing like good players, and that is kind of what you expect for your team. And obviously, there's going to be ups and downs throughout the marathon of a baseball season, but the good players are playing like good players, and Francisco Alvarez is everything about this guy oozes, one of the superstars of this sport. Not just one of the best catchers, just one of the biggest superstars in the sport. And Mark Vientos, big credit to him, because the last couple of years, we talked about this, on previous shows, he was up, he was down. And when he was here, he wasn't really getting playing time with any level of consistency. And he thought he had a handle on the designated hitter job in the middle of March. And all of a sudden, the Mets signed JD Martinez. And that means you're not only not the DH, you're also just not on the major league team. It would have been very easy for Mark Vientos over the last basically 3 years of almost being messed with in a way, right? To be like, forget this and maybe check out on the Mets organization. But he took it the right way, like a professional. He went down to AAA. He did what he had to do, worked on what the organization wanted him to work on. He's gotten the call up, and obviously he's ran away with the third base job. And young, homegrown guys performing, I don't think there's anything that energizes a fan base much more.
Right. That's what matters at the end of the day. It's the fact of, do you have a foundation in place for this team? And the Mets have veterans that are really, really good. It's not that this is, the cupboard's bare and the Mets are just searching to find any, resemblance of hope. Pete Alonso, established major league slugger, right? Francisco Lindor, established major league star. Nimmo's been such a good player for this organization. But the fact is, when you look at, the guys that are under 25 years old, that are under team control for a long time, the guys that allow you to supplement the roster with massive free agents and use those as plugging holes rather than trying to buy a baseball team, that outlook is just entirely different. And of course, it's led by Alvarez. But yeah, Joe, you're bringing up Vientos, who at one point, we can call it what it is. I'm not going to say he was entirely written off by the organization, but it felt like for a moment there, Mark Vientos had been written off. And listen, we read the mailbag every day, and I'm not blaming anyone for thinking this because the team was kind of telling you what they thought. But Joe, we were getting questions of, why keep this guy? Like, you're just burying his career in AAA, give him a chance somewhere else. And the argument always was, he is a key depth piece at a minimum with upside. And fans understandably are fatigued by the word upside, because upside usually means a player that has not reached their potential yet. But everybody wants power in their system. And Mark Vientos was one of the key cogs in the system that has power. It was about becoming a more consistent major league hitter. And through 136 at-bats in the 2024 season right now, Joe, Mark Vientos is batting over 300. He's got a 941 OPS. He hits for power, but he also hits for contact as well. And yeah, there's been some frustrating moments in the infield, and the Mets are understandably looking to have defensive replacements for him. But he hasn't been a butcher at third base by any means, where you can play him out there. And, whispers quietly, Mark Vientos one day, if things look a lot different in the future, can also be this team's first baseman. There's just a lot of areas where he is such a big piece for this team. After, if you asked us that 5 months ago, nobody seemed to care about Mark Vientos, which looks crazy right now.
Yeah, he was almost discarded by seemingly the organization and certainly the fans. When Vientos I was debating fans all offseason about letting Vientos get run at designated hitter before JD Martinez. And essentially everyone said that he has no chance to succeed at the big league level. And he's certainly proving that wrong. And you mentioned Alvarez and Vientos, and shout out to SNY Mets on Twitter. They are one of only 5 duos in baseball right now with an OPS of at least 900. Your list is Aaron Judge and Juan Soto on the Yankees, Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman on the Dodgers, Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez on the Astros, Stephen Kwan and Daniel Fry on the Guardians, and Mark Vientos and Francisco Alvarez on the Mets. What a time to be alive.
Right. The first 6 players you named are 6 of the best players in baseball. Like, these 6 of the best players in baseball. The 2 on the Guardians are arguably the best team in baseball right now. Or could
Kwan's
be
hitting like 400.
And Kwan is having a 400 season. That's not a fluke by any means. Like, he is legitimately hitting 400 on a great team. And then it's Francisco Alvarez and Mark Vientos. So it's an absolute wild sequence. And we kind of saw them be such a big part of the opener against the Nationals in DC on Monday Night, Joe. And when you look at this game, it was kind of a little bit of what we saw in the Houston series, where the Mets lost 2 or 3, and it felt like the Mets very easily could have been in control of that entire series, where the offense is doing their job. The starting pitching, and I know McGill had a little bit of a rough go of it on Saturday, but for the most part, the starting pitching is doing its job. And even Severino's start against the Astros, like, you didn't look at Severino's start and go, man, he got bombed. Like, he ran into a rougher day, but never looked like he kept the team in the game.
Yeah.
The bullpen is the flip side of it right now, Joe, where it couldn't have been magnified more in that Monday night win over the Nationals, where the team goes up 9-3 in the 10th inning. They take a 6-run lead in extra innings. And the Mets, who are going through some stuff right now, the Edwin Diaz suspension, which you've highlighted, Joe, it's not just not having Edwin Diaz, it's not having that roster spot for the bullpen as well. The Mets are just trying to figure out how they can get through games. And the fact that a 6-run lead at times is a big sweat. And we've talked about this a lot too. It's not the hard contact or balls getting tattooed. It's putting guys on base when you have that big of a lead where you just got to throw strikes and take your chances. The Mets just got to find a way through this right now, Joe, because nobody is selling relievers because it's not the deadline yet. And Edwin Diaz is not back still for a little bit of time. And Sean Reed-Foley needs a little bit of time as well. Nobody wants to hear this, but this is just a bind for Stearns where you can only be so creative for so long.
Yeah, there's this like adage out there that's just like David Stearns needs to be aggressive and he needs to go address it. Now, there isn't a bullpen store you just walk up to, and shout out to Jeff. I think he said it in our text chain last night for talking about the bullpen store. You don't just walk up, ring the doorbell, and a new reliever answers the door and comes in to make an impact. Though, just got a notification. So live on the show, Tyler J has been optioned to AAA and Jose Buto has been recalled.
Perfect segue, because this is the combo I want to have.
So what the Mets need to do, and there is a balance here because you also need to maintain your starting pitching depth. And what is very difficult, and teams really don't want to do this, when a guy is stretched out as a starter, you don't want to unstretch him and put him in the bullpen. And then a couple starting pitcher injuries happen, which, knock on wood, the Mets have been one of the more fortunate teams in baseball when it comes to starting pitching injuries this year. It's really difficult to then stretch the guy back out to become a starter again. So I don't think, there's been a lot of questions and a lot of talk about just converting all of the starters to relievers. Make David Peterson a reliever, make Tyler McGill a reliever, make Jose Buto a reliever. I think you could do it with one, maybe two in a few weeks if everything is good when Senga returns. But right now, where we record, July 2nd, they need to navigate these next 4 games without Edwin Diaz. And they need to navigate through about the All-Star break probably you just need to stay afloat, because that's when you can start having conversations about trades. And some of that creativity, I think, is probably on display as Jose Buto coming up. I don't think that is to start a game. I believe that is to come in and be a bulk inning reliever, kind of almost having 2 Adrian Hausers in a sense, who's, when we talk about the bat of the bullpen, Adrian Hauser's been fantastic since he moved to the pen.
Right. That's the fine line of it is, and I'm a fan of this because it's kind of reached the breaking point, right? Like the floodgates are open a little bit. You want to protect, and the Mets are very fortunate that they have depth in their starting pitching right now. You want to protect yourself from injuries. And a lot of this coincides with, Kodai Senga making his way back, where you can start to obviously flip some of those starters into relievers until there's any kind of supply available to acquire relievers. So that's the fine spot the Mets find themselves in. And at the end of the day, it sounds crazy to say it, Joe, but part of the answer to this is to have an elite offense. And right now, it looks like the Mets have an elite offense.
Last night, Monday night's game against the Nationals, a prime example. They obviously, it was 3-3 going to the extras, but if the Mets scored 2, then they may not win that baseball game.
And Mackenzie Gore is really good. Like that, them having a down night against a starter, it's like, okay, yeah sure.
And look, it's going to happen. Even if the Mets have been playing like the best offense in baseball for over a month now, that doesn't mean every single day you're going to score 7 runs.
But beat up on relievers.
Yeah, you have to beat up on relievers. You have to get starters out of the game. But that is the antidote in the interim. You need to get more length out of the starters, which I think they pulled Peterson a little early last night. I wasn't ready to pull him quite yet, but they need length from their starters so that way you don't have to use 4 to 5 relievers a night, and then there's no off day, so it's hard to balance the rest of these guys. You can't option them down because then you can't call them up for 10 days or 2 weeks, and it's a whole kind of difficult situation. And all this while the Mets are playing down a man because Edwin Diaz is suspended. So very difficult, but the Mets are almost through this 10-game stretch. And then I think things can normalize a little bit, starting this weekend when Edwin Diaz is eligible to be back.
All right, so let's jump into the rotation here as the rotation turns. Christian Scott on his way back, which we knew this wasn't an if, but really a when here, Joe, that Scott would be back. Arguably one of the Mets' best starters. They're just being very careful with him, and we're able to tailor his innings a little bit closer in AAA. Now he's back. Kodai Senga going on a rehab assignment that you've said in the past, Joe, this will be lengthy because of the time he's been out. It's going to take a while to build him back up. Tyler McGill sent down. Kind of sounds like McGill might continue to act as a starting pitcher. I know he's a big domino everybody wonders about as a reliever because maybe his lack of length can play better in a bullpen role. How do you see this all playing out for the month of July now, Joe, before we at least get to the All-Star break?
So I think you're going to keep Tyler McGill in the starting role for now, but I do think that is something if we get into late August and into September when rosters expand by a couple spots and you have maybe a little more certainty on where you are from a health perspective in the rotation, I think that's the time when you maybe make the flip to throw McGill into the bullpen. But I think the Mets have an opportunity to just have a way better rotation by the end of July, right? I think Christian Scott, as you mentioned, I think he's probably where the Mets stand right now, healthy, the second best starting pitcher that they have. Kodai Senga, if he comes back and is anything like he was last year, that is the best starting pitcher that the Mets have. Yeah, and there is an opportunity, of course, as we approach the trade deadline. There's no saying the Mets can't add another starter if they want to. I think the bullpen would certainly be a focus, but the rotation needs to continue to hold it down because this bullpen is definitely not the strong suit of the team. And, that's going to happen when you lose three of your guys basically for the season that you were going to rely on to pitch in, meaningful parts of the game. So the rotation, you have Christian Scott coming back, and, I think the Mets are going to continue to try to tailor his innings a little bit. I don't think they're going to be yanking him after 4 every start or something, but once Senga goes back, returns, you could go back to that 6-man rotation, which we have talked about on this show a lot, through the first couple months of the season. And I think that can get Scott through the season, Senga through the season, and, hopefully into a pennant race run in September. All
right. You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. All right, with the absolute party scene that Citi Field has been over the last week, we thought it was the perfect time to check in with Vito, Calise, and Jonathan Barron from the Meet at the Apple podcast, who are coming to us right now from that glorious space in Citi Field. Fellas, thanks for joining us. How are we doing?
We're good, guys. Thanks so much for having us. We know we caught up with you guys at spring training, got to talk for the first time. So glad to bring the Mets podcasts together.
So Vito, I'll start with you, but I want to hear both your thoughts on this. As fellow members of the Mets podcast world, how's the show been going this year? It's been an eventful season to really have a first full season of a podcast, I'd say.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Last year we started the minor league podcast, and that was a pretty good season to start a minor league podcast. And this season the highs have been so high. So the last few weeks have been pretty fun. We've been having a lot of fun in our thumbnails with the Grimace stuff. After the OMG performance, we got to talk about it because John had an inside track on that night. But yeah, like going from the Jorge Lopez day where we were in here and we had no idea what was even going on outside the room to where we are now, it's been an interesting few weeks.
I think that's the first time that we've mentioned that name since it happened, really.
Yeah, well, no, I think we might have said on the podcast, like we genuinely didn't know what was happening because we were in this room.
Yeah, I got a text alert or a Twitter notification about what happened. We had just wrapped up recording. But yeah, I mean, like Vito said, it's been a lot of fun. One thing that Vito and I have really stayed true to is staying glass half full. Even when the team was letting a couple games slip away there and, they eventually kind of hit that rock bottom spot at 11 under, there were two things that remained true. Number one was that the teams around them were losing as well, right there with them. And number two was that I always believe that if you can continue to lead late in games, even if you wind up blowing some. The team that has the ability to take the lead into the later innings of a game, eventually it was unsustainable for them to not be able to get the final outs of games at the rate that they were doing so. So we stayed positive, and look, there's a lot of people out there. You guys know this. Anyone else does a Mets podcast knows this. This is a special kind of fan base. There's a natural, we want to just expect the worst kind of attitude that I think that I get it. Vito and I grew up diehard Mets fans. So, we've been in it our entire lives, whether it's injuries or, whatever freak thing. Ike Davis getting valley fever. I'm just, randomly naming some things that have happened.
Cespedes getting
a wild boar. Yeah, it's always something. So we get that. We get people waiting for the other shoe to drop, but that's not our track, and that's not what you're going to get here at Meet at the Apple. We don't want people to think that we are just being aloof in our positivity and our expecting things to get better, but things have gotten a lot better. So, it's nice that we were kind of ahead of that trend where you listen to some other podcasts, and a lot of them have had to do a complete 180, whereas, we've stayed pretty consistent, but it's a really long season. And that's what people need to understand is that, this sport allows for turnarounds like this. And you look at, recent baseball history, the Nationals in 2019, the Phillies in 2022. This happens. The Braves lose Ronald Acuna Jr. and they go on to win the World Series. This is how this sport works. So we always try to keep that in the back of our minds when we go about our business.
I'm by nature also a glass half full kind of guy, and I get yelled at it on Twitter all the time. So it's just a wonderful place to be.
You get yelled at in our group chat.
Yeah, all of us. Jeff and Connor are just bullies. It's really wrong. But we'll start with Jonathan and obviously Vito on this one. And Vito, you can't pick Grimace for your answer here. What's been your guys' favorite moment or story so far this season doing the show?
So this is going to sound, I don't want it to sound lazy, but it really is Jose Iglesias. We interviewed Jose, I think about 2 weeks before the OMG performance. So, he's a great story in that he hadn't played in the big league since 2022. The day he comes up, he's in the lineup, he gets that first hit, he kisses the baseball. You start to hear after the game, he says it's kind of like, being a major leaguer for the first time all over again. We had never really spoken to Jose. And when he sat down in the room with us, he was so genuine. And the answers he gave us were so thoughtful. I pitched him right there on the spot about doing a performance. He was a little bit standoffish. He said yes, and he liked the idea. He talked about doing it a little later in the season. But if you guys remember last year, John Curtis was with the Mets for a little bit. They had signed him the year before. The Mets rehabbed him off of his Tommy John surgery. And, I find different little nuggets and diamonds in the rough about guys, from throughout their careers. And John Curtis also was a musician, not as good as Jose Iglesias, didn't have a top of the charts Latin pop summer smash, but he actually sang the national anthem for Rochester when he was back in the minor leagues. And we work with someone who coordinates all the national anthem singers. Shout out Jenna Doak. And I have been pitching Jenna on John Curtis singing the anthem because I am fascinated by guys that can both play baseball at a very high level, of course, in the major leagues, and also be musicians, which is also a really, really special talent. So that one didn't come to fruition. John Curtis didn't stick around too long during the season. But when I heard that Jose was a musician and I heard that he was debuting the new song, I immediately was like, we got to get this going. And I brought it up, and it took a little time. And then Steve Gelbs did the sideline report about it, and the article in The Athletic came out, and the whole thing started to gain some steam. And just seeing it all happen and the way that Jose embraced the whole thing, and then thinking back to the conversation that we had with him and just remembering, how genuine and how open-minded he was. We talked to him about his major league debut way back when with the Red Sox. We talked about how he was one of the guys that Jacob deGrom struck out in the 2015 All-Star game when deGrom struck out the side on 10 pitches. He was one of the guys. So, I mean, these guys are human beings, and it's so cool to be able to get to see a different side of them and bring out a different side of them, because people forget that they're human beings. But, I mean, he is a top-flight human being. So, sorry, I took that. That might have been your answer. Sorry about that.
No, I mean, I think for me overall, it's just the first half has been a roller coaster. And, all of us here being Mets fans growing up, how can you not look at June on the schedule every year and just be waiting for disaster to strike? And then out of all years, We have a historically bad May, and then June is the month that saves us. Every single night was electric here. Like, just watching this place become a fun place to be. And honestly, the Subway Series, the rain delay, I sat in the social media booth with our social media team that night, and I turned to them right before the rain delay like really got going. And I was like, I think this rain delay is going to turn this place into a real party. Like, I think people are going to, because
the big thing was it was before the seventh inning.
That was what I was about to say. It was before the seventh inning. So like that changes things. That changes the vibe of a ballpark.
Yeah.
But
not for us, by the way, not for us.
Just this first half has been so much fun. And it's a really special team. And after Friday night's performance, the one thing everybody was saying to each other is like, there's something really special about the guys on this roster right now.
All right, so let's talk about the likely current frontrunner as the Mets MVP this year, which is obviously Grimace, who just appears everywhere. A big part of that rain delay, by the way, we think, or maybe an imposter of Grimace. I know you guys were. Yeah, exactly. I know you guys were involved in this from the beginning. So, what is happening here? And for those that don't know, Vito, you caught the famous first pitch from Grimace, and good form by you, because I don't think it was reaching.
Come on, Connor, don't lie. Don't lie. It was terrible form.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to be polite. Better than above the 50-cent bar. Yeah, above the 50-cent bar.
John is being a jerk, but John is the least coordinated person with muscles I've seen in my life. I've said this before. You go out there, you're in the lines, and as an employee, it's a lot scarier to mess up the lines than a random fan. If I mess up the lines, I'm going to get screamed at. If a fan throwing out or catching the first pitch messes it up, they're not going to say anything to them. So I was shook. But no, I mean, look, I can tell you so Grimace was started by Janie Murray from our social media team and me a year ago. Obsessed with Grimace in general. This was before the shake trend even started popping off. We had just seen McDonald's start posting like camera roll photos of Grimace and stuff, and we started sending each other Grimace memes. Really wanted Grimace to come out to throw a first pitch. Reached out to McDonald's. The milkshake thing started to blow up. McDonald's was like, oh, I don't think it's going to work around this time. We'll figure out something a different time. This year, we're getting ready for the season. I think around May, we might have seen, late May, we saw Grimace at a Canucks game.
Really?
He was at a Vancouver Canucks game in the stands in a suite.
So he has a passport.
And he has a passport. McDonald has access to all countries. So at that moment, we were like, this is it. It's time to bring him back. We reach out to McDonald's. They give us a date a week or two later, which happens to be what on record previously was Grimace's birthday. We get him out for a game with like 4 or 5 days notice. And like for the most part, I think the only things we had planned were the first pitch and being part of the t-shirt toss. And then John and I actually were the ones who were moving him around behind home plate. So that was us together where we came up with this idea to get a crowd shot, and then John and I are in the most expensive seats in the ballpark with a giant barricade of a person being Grimace trying to find a spot for him to not ruin people's nights and ruin people's view.
And so what really happened was that was Braxton Garrett for the Marlins that night who started, and we were trying to throw him off his game a little bit. There was a movie, I forget what it was, but they had done a promo where they
Smile.
Smile. They put a girl behind the plate, and she was.
I remember that. This
a few ballparks, yeah. She was just like kind of staring. So took a little inspiration from that. Wanted to put Grimace right behind the plate and just kind of mess with Braxton Garrett. Turned out it wasn't necessary. Mets lit Braxton Garrett up, but we were trying to get Grimace into a seat. And I shortly came to realize, Vito told me that Grimace is not sitting in a seat because he cannot fit in a seat. So we had to do the next best thing, which was just kind of have him pop his head out and do the little.
Which was an accident, really.
It was serendipitous.
It was literally like we were just trying to find a place to put him, and we actually really just put him in a holding spot for a second because where we originally wanted to put him was a sponsor spot. You can't block the sponsors, so we put him in a nook. And Grimace just started leaning out and popping out. And then all of us came together and realized, oh, this is even better just to have him like popping out and waving. So it was just a serendipitous night. Like even before the win streak, it was really cool that night, just seeing like Twitter was exploding over Grimace being at the ballpark. And like, it just made people happy. And it's been so fun to see like the past, I guess it's like close to a month now of like the memes don't stop. It's been really cool. And we know we have a Grimace. We not only have a Grimace in our podcast studio, We have a Grimace autograph ball.
What's the
with
did he give you some hair?
That's game used Grimace right there, boys. That's game used Grimace.
That too. He left that behind. He did a little shoot with us last Friday, I think it was. Yeah. And he left a little. He shave a little bit off for you?
He has to get ready. He has to get camera ready. So you know, there's some prep, and his shavings were left behind, and I threw him in our Grimace ball case.
Oh, what a time! But you talk about people being happy. I would say the Apple TV game, obviously Jose Iglesias you're talking about performing OMG. I wasn't sure if it was real. I'm watching Apple TV and they're like, yeah, just stand by for a performance of OMG. I'm like, that's not actually happening, is it? And boy, did it happen. Vibes were off the chart. What was the vibe at the ballpark? And when did you guys know he was actually going to perform OMG that night? Because it couldn't have been planned too far in advance. If they lost, is he really going to go out and go perform?
Wait, was it on? It was on Apple TV?
Yeah, they took it. They stayed.
I had no clue until right now that
Apple
made it to
never
Apple.
turned it off.
Yeah, well, so Apple TV is cool because it's not like you're watching a TV channel and there's an East and a West Coast game. It's two separate streams. So they didn't have to wait to get to the next game. Like if you are on the Mets stream, you're on the Mets stream and that's it. When the game's over and they sign off the air, stream's dead. So yes, it's a long story. Where do we begin? So it had come up like I mentioned. You know, I've always wanted to do something like this with a player, putting his musical talents on display for the fans. Originally, the song was supposed to come out on July 3rd, and I guess it was JD Martinez who he and Jose go way back to Detroit. They played together in Boston as well, so they have a really good relationship. And apparently, and I don't know that this is definitely the truth, but this is what I've read. JD was the one who convinced Jose to release the song early. And we had said all along, once the song really started to pick up steam, like Jose was missing out on a lot of streams because it was widespread and everyone was like, I want to listen. Where can I find it? I can't find it. Our DJ Razor, who played it on Home Runs, was like the only guy along with Jose that actually had the song in his possession.
You only got it like 3 days early and you were pumped about that.
I got the song, but like I had to really, really keep it on lockdown because, you know, you can't be releasing a song that's not released. The label would not have liked that whatsoever. So the plan came together pretty quickly. It was probably, it was earlier that week. You know, there was a little planning involved, but once the release date became Friday and it became a realistic option, it happened pretty fast. And having the post-game fireworks show really made this, an even better, more cohesive production because we have time to kill between the end of the game and fireworks. Usually we do it with a DJ set because Friday night DJs usually coincide with our fireworks shows. But this was a different kind of post-game performance that we had, and we timed it up incredibly well. And shout out to my boss, Brendan McKeon, who had the great idea to have the song pretty much transition right into the fireworks show, which we used time code to make the fireworks go off to a musical score. So we did a little math and we figured out the song is 2:27. We counted backwards. We have a minute of pre-roll on the fireworks. That's the time code, pretty much talking to the computers. Some nerd stuff that people don't probably care about. But we timed it up pretty much the second he said, "Thank you, New York. I love you. Let's go, New York Mets." All of a sudden on the scoreboard came 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, straight into the fireworks show.
And the fireworks on the chorus.
Yep. So that night, and I'm sure you guys noticed last year, we had a lot of fireworks. When the Mets hit home runs, we had some on fireworks night as well, and we have 5. So if the Mets hit 5 home runs, that's a good problem to have. They only hit 3. I say the word only loosely because it was a lot of excitement that night. But I wanted to save 1 or 2 definitely because I definitely wanted to have a firework hit when he hit the chorus and the beat kind of dropped, if you would. So it was, I couldn't sleep that night. I'm sure you felt the same way. It was a magical night here. It couldn't have all worked out any better. There was so much planning and cooperation from so many different people. Like Mendy told us on Sunday, it was just the stars fully aligned.
And in many ways, because there was 3 big storylines in June. It was Pride Month, so you had that going for the Mets, and this was on Pride night.
Yep.
The OMG song had become a big thing, so behind the scenes, we all knew that if they won, we were going to get this OMG performance. And then the third thing was Grimace was actually in the building that night.
Yes.
So all 3 June things
insane
came together on this night. I was actually first few innings, I was like running around with Grimace trying to get him for his surprise spot, also filming some stuff with him. And then I got to go join my wife and a bunch of friends in our seats in like 109 or something from the 5th inning on. And yeah, I mean, from the stands, it was absolutely electric. I did not tell anybody about the secret. I didn't even tell my wife the day before.
You didn't tell anybody?
I did not tell anybody because I didn't want to jinx anything.
Yeah.
I didn't want to tell anybody and then it not happen. So
Yeah.
I kept it to myself.
Yeah, I've never been that nervous for a regular season game. Yeah, probably not since like game 162 in 08 had I been that nervous, because I knew what was on the line and I knew how special and awesome it would be. And then the first pitch of the game, Altuve takes Quintana deep, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, you can't make this up.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, the boys were resilient once again. And how about Jeff McNeil hitting that 3-run home run? The control room, I can tell you, we have a group chat, and the Michael Scott, oh my God, it's happening. No pun intended with oh my God. That was sent around a little bit. And then we all kind of got ourselves into, okay, like, let's get ready for this because we're doing this. And the Daniel Nunez got himself out of a big jam. And from there, it was just, it was magic. And so let me ask you guys, were you guys nervous about it? Because I know we've seen a lot of the discourse online. Oh, Timmy Trumpet. And I kind of went on a rant on Sunday night about this. The Mets had lost 2 games after in the post-concert era. And thankfully, they won on Monday night because the discourse would have gotten real bad, I think. But where did you guys stand on that? Because to me, you got to strike while the iron's hot. That's kind of a philosophy that I, carry myself with in many different walks of life. So where did you guys stand on the whole thing?
Well, it was awesome, and you guys did the right thing, and I was absolutely terrified after the weekend. I mean, there's just no way around it. Like it's not us actually believing a concert curse. It's that the beauty of podcasting is interacting with your audience, and audience will gravitate towards, is this going to now curse us after we were blessed by all these great things? That is the fear of a podcast host. Joe, what did you think?
Well, I don't believe in jinxes. They don't exist. I don't believe in curses. I believe in none of those things. There's nothing that I could say or what could happen. I don't think Jose Iglesias performing a song could have any factor in how the Mets play for days ahead. With that said, if the Mets had lost 4 in a row or 5 in a row after, to Connor's point, as podcasters, we'd have literally no choice but to talk about it. So I'm glad that they were able to hold on Monday night to make sure that that was not a conversation on Tuesday show, because it would have been.
And you know what? Like, one thing I saw after was a lot of fans on Twitter. Well, actually, it was like 90% positive, I would say, the night after the concert.
Oh, it was like 99%
positive.
Yeah,
people are in.
100% approval rating. Yes.
Yeah. I saw a few people a day or two after say, like, oh, look, the Mets celebrated getting a game above 500 and then had a concert. But, like, that's not the case. This was very timing based, and this was very based on his song came out that day. We had fireworks that night, and it was just the perfect time to do it. And, like, if you were in the ballpark that night, it was so much fun. And, like, John brought up the Timmy Trumpet thing that people bring up. I was here that night as a fan. Everybody loved that night too. And the Mets went 16-10 after that up until the Braves series. So everybody who likes to blame these things forgets that there's deeper numbers that literally dispute everything you'd want to believe anyway.
Yeah, and I've also heard, I was listening to The Fan yesterday, and Sean Marash, who I like Sean Marash, funny guy.
You said voice of the Young Rangers fan. You love Sean
voice
Marash.
of the Young Ranger fan. That's right. But when it's baseball season, I'm not as in on Sean Marash. But he was talking yesterday, and he was like, "Oh, well, the Astros are probably pissed off. They were getting High School Musical, and the rest of the league is probably taking aim at the Mets." But then I see the Mariners play OMG at T-Mobile before the game. I saw, I think it was like an Instagram story, the backfields in Port St. Lucie, Florida. I think it was like some FCL Marlins put up a story with the song playing that Jose then reshared on his story.
Banger's gonna bang.
And yeah, there was another example of it was Yordan Alvarez. Yordan Alvarez put a story up with OMG. So and he's on the Astros. He's not just,
right.
An innocent bystander. He was on the team in the other clubhouse while this was all happening, and he's down with it. Of course, Jose and Yordan, both fellow countrymen from Cuba. But I think that Major League Baseball teams around the league are embracing this, because here's the thing. Like you just said, the song bangs. It is actually a great song. Not a good song. It's a great song. It's giving me Despacito vibes.
Yeah.
Like that's what it reminds me of.
Well,
So
I said this last night. Baseball's come a long way, because of when we were kids, we see Last Things Millage, high five a bunch of fans after a home run. Everybody's furious. Last night, I watched Jose Iglesias hit a home run and do the OMG dance with fans going into the dugout, and it made me so happy.
It was incredible. Incredible scenes in DC on Monday night.
Yeah, it's all about the atmosphere of the ballpark, and I think it's something that's played an integral part of not only the atmosphere, like you just said, at Citi Field, but now at away stadiums, which is a total game changer for any team. We really appreciate you guys joining us today, and we're excited because you've invited us to stop by your studio in a few weeks to jump on Meet at the Apple. We can't wait. Joe and I will be at the park for that, so we'll chat again, and it'll probably be a couple more crazy weeks ahead, so we'll have plenty to talk about. Please check out the Meet at the Apple podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify. Obviously, you guys are on YouTube as well, or wherever you get your pods. Vito, Jonathan, thanks so much, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys. Let's go Mets. Keep it rolling. OMG.
Great stuff from Vito and Jonathan, of course, from the Meet at the Apple podcast. Joe, it'll be a lot of fun when we get out to Citi Field again and jump on their podcast, wherever we end up recording with them. We'll have there's a lot of places, right? It's like,
yeah, who knows? I said whatever you guys want.
Yeah, we could be literally sitting on top of the Apple with microphones, and somebody hits a home run, and you just see us getting launched off the top. It's a good idea if you want to talk about Citi Field atmosphere. All right, let's go down on the farm. We kind of continue the endless theme of the bullpen, Joe, which let me throw my hands up and say, I mean, I had a little bit of a mini fit in the group text the other night because I'm just sick of watching, 6-run leads, 5-run leads, sweating them out. There's nothing more than I hate than sweating out games like that. But it's good that our problems right now are bullpen related. The offense is alive. The starting pitching's been good. The bullpen being the problem, that is usually something that is so high variance that if you can't even fix it internally, and usually you can get to be mediocre internally, there are going to be options externally. And that's what a lot of Down on the Farm can be about. So we start with Eric Orsi, Joe, AAA reliever, good strikeout stuff. Somebody that, it feels like we've talked about him for a long time, even since the Mets drafted him, where he was a 5th-round pick in 2020. He was a college pitcher. So it felt like, and now he's 26 years old in Syracuse. I believe, Joe, this is his 3rd season in Syracuse at this point. I said to you the other day, I'm just a little surprised we haven't seen him yet. Why do you think that is?
This year, Orsi's strikeout numbers are up a bit. The walk numbers, control has always been a problem for him. The home run ball has spiked in a massive way this year, allowing almost 2 home runs per 9 innings. But, like you said, former 5th-round pick, and obviously a fantastic story of multi-time cancer survivor. Got through a lot to get to where he is. And I mean, no disrespect to the Tyler Jays and the Matt Festas of the world that are getting their opportunities here with the Mets. I honestly thought there was a chance that Orsi would be, one of the guys as the Mets are in, I don't want to say desperation, but pretty close to a state of desperation in the bullpen. I figured Orsi would be someone that could get a shot, and perhaps he still does. I think the back couple spots of the bullpen for the next, call it 2-3 weeks, are probably going to be in flux a lot, where you're sending guys down, you're designating guys for assignment, you're making changes. You could look at a guy like Max Kranick, who was initially brought in from Pittsburgh. They claimed him on waivers last offseason, and he was intended to be a part of the starting pitching depth. And he started the year out as a starter in AAA. Mets have shifted him since to the bullpen, frequently doing 2 innings, 3 innings per outing. So I think Max Kranick is another name to keep an eye on. And Wilkin Ramos was recently promoted to AAA Syracuse after dominating AA Binghamton, a former minor league Rule 5 pick. He's up to mid-90s on a sinker, sweeper. He kind of has 2 pitches. One goes this way, one goes that way. And when he's controlling the ball, he has a chance to be a big league pitcher. And if you want to just go for velocity and stuff coming down the pike, Bryce Montes de Oca, favorite of this show, is working his way back from Tommy John surgery. The results haven't quite been there in the early going of his minor league rehab assignment, but it's about getting him healthy. And Shintaro Fujinami is also coming back from injury. And I know control is obviously a huge problem for Fujinami, but I think this year it was even worse than I think we expected. And then it turns out he had a shoulder issue, and maybe that played a bit of a role. He is now throwing in rehab games in the minor leagues. He's probably not going to be ready until after the All-Star break, but a couple 100-mile-an-hour fastball possibilities coming, and guys like Eric Orzi, Max Kranick, Wilkin Ramos, those might be just a few names to keep an eye on that are as guys that could maybe get cycled into the bottom part of this bullpen.
So you got to love about the Mets pod. All the names we spend the entire month of March talking about and then disappear for months, resurface when it's all hands on deck in July. Fujinami, Kranick. I mean, Montes de Oca we knew was coming back from injury, so that's a different story as well. All right, let's close out down on the farm by talking about the Futures game. And Brandon Sproat, Joe, will be the Mets representative in the Futures game. He's just had a marvelous season across both A-ball and double A-ball so far.
I mean, I don't think anybody could have imagined it would be this good. ERA below 2. When you watch him pitch, he has truly developed into a pitcher before our eyes. And at Florida, in a ways, he was kind of a thrower. It was just, pelting in 100 to 101 mile an hour fastballs and kind of working on some of his secondary stuff. He looks much more refined since entering the Mets player development system. And I wrote in my top 30 list, which we promoted on last week's show, but I will promote forever because it took me a long time to do. Go check out my top 30 list. It's pinned on my Twitter profile, and you can find it on SNY.tv. I wrote in my write-up for Sproat, who I had as the number 7 prospect in the season, in the system, that he is going to be on all top 100 lists, by the offseason. Baseball America already put him in theirs, and MLB Pipeline updated their top 100 yesterday, and Brandon Sproat made his debut in their top 100. So just a fantastic player development story, and I'm really excited to see him get into the Futures game where he might face 1 or 2 batters and he could just let it rip. You might see 102. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw 102 during the Futures
pumping
game. Yeah, just an exciting young arm for the Mets.
Here's a question I never thought I'd ask you. Does Sproat throw a pitch at Citi Field before both Dom Hamill and Mike Vassell?
Ooh. I don't think any of them throw a pitch at Citi Field this year. Hopefully.
Sure.
He might. He honestly might. I know, last offseason the conversation was Christian Scott versus Mike Vassell, and I was kind of on an island saying I thought Scott would debut before
people
Vassell.
Called you a madman.
And I think, and I may be, but I think in this case, it honestly would not surprise me. I never even thought about it that way, but it wouldn't shock me at all.
All right, of course, stay in tune with SNY.tv for all Joe's work on the farm system, new mock draft as we get really, really close to the MLB draft. And as he said, be sure to give that 30 prospect list a read because it is great stuff. And I keep kind of trying to get in Joe's ear to keep pumping up those numbers. The fact that he's up to 30 now, it'll be at 50 by next year, folks. Just wait for it. It's a great week to check out the Brooklyn Cyclones as they host the Hudson Valley Renegades, an affiliate of the Yankees. On Wednesday night, the first 1,500 fans will receive a Joey Chestnut bobblehead, and there'll be post-game fireworks. Also, check out the special rooftop barbecue and summer party shirt ticket packages that are available. For full details, visit brooklyncyclones.com. It is time for the scoreboard, and we are here to review our predictions from last week that were live at Citi Field. First one was, yes or no, will JD Martinez homer in this series? Joe, we both said yes, he didn't. And this was all Subway Series edition, by the way. Yes or no, will Pete Alonso homer in this series? Joe, we both said no, and he didn't. We each got a point. Yes or no, will Francisco Alvarez homer in this series? Yeah, I actually have a gripe with this. We're going to have to talk about this after. Joe, it says here that you said yes, and I know you did. I was sitting next to you. It says here that I said no. I am 99% sure my exact quote was, Francisco Alvarez lives for the big moment. Yes, he will homer in this series. And I celebrated extra hard when he did, not just for the Mets, but for the fact that we had said yes. So I'm going to dispute.
Jeff, pull the tapes.
I am apparently not getting a point here. I have a massive problem with this. Anyways, a point to Joe. Yes or no, will Mark Vientos homer in this series? We both said no. He hit 2 home runs right in front of our faces, Joe, which is great. Great for Mark Vientos, great for the Mets. No points for each of us. Yes or no, will this series see any extra innings? Joe, you said no. I said yes, a point to you. Over-under push was set at 2 for Francisco Lindor hits. Joe, you pushed. I went over. Lindor had 4 hits, a point to me. Over push was set at 0. Mets starters going at least 6 innings. We both pushed. We both got a point. The Mets did not have starters going at least 6 innings. Over-under push was set at 1. Mets wins. we both were cowards and pushed. The Mets won both games of the Subway Series because they do usually split. So we bet on time. Apparently this week, Joe, you won 4-3. I'm not a sore loser. I'm not a complainer. We're gonna have to go back to the drawing board. I think it was 4-4. It
might be 4-4. It might be 4-4.
You're looking at me like, I was sitting next to you. I'm pretty sure you agreed with me.
I thought you agreed, but Jeff could loop the audio in either way.
Yeah, and if I'm wrong, boy, I'm gonna have some egg on my face. I'm gonna have some egg on my face for sure. So, we'll see. We'll check on the tape. All right, for the season as it stands right now, and this is before the tape is checked. Joe, you're leading 29-25. This week, 7 games, 3 more against the Nationals, 4 against the Pirates. Of the Mets have back-to-back series of 4 games here. They already played the Nationals one time. Yes or no, will Christian Scott get his first major league win on Wednesday? Joe, since you technically are in the lead right now, I will give you the floor.
I will say no, but I won't be surprised, I think, otherwise. But I just have a feeling that this screams like a 5-inning start for Christian Scott.
I'm with you as well. My prediction for this game is that Christian Scott leaves with a lead and that he will still not get the win. The Nationals will tie because it's 5. If he was going 7 innings, I'd be like, okay, the Mets can get through that. I'm with you as well. I'm going to go no, but hopefully he does. Over-under push was set at 2. Is set at 2 for Francisco Alvarez home runs. He's just absolutely scorching right now. I'm going to go under here, Joe, and I hate to do it because Alvarez, and this is a good thing, is not just swinging as hard as he can at every single pitch anymore. He's hitting opposite field doubles, triples. He's hitting singles. He's hitting the ball in the gap. I'm going to go under here for Alvarez, and that's okay.
That triple was just
glorious.
That was man strength. Just an easy push out and missed the home run by inches. I'll be a little more optimistic and I'll say push. So I think Alvarez will get a couple homers and maybe it'll be 4. Who knows?
Over under push is set at 2 for Mark Vientos home runs here, Joe.
We really bet against Mark Vientos last week, and
I'll do it again.
I'm gonna go under. I will do it again. I'll go under, but if it was 1, I would have pushed. I think he will homer this week, but I think it'll just be 1.
I agree. And listen, if Alvarez and Vientos each hit a home run this week, that's fine. I mean, listen, there's not a lot of 2 and 3 home run weeks consistently all the time. So I'm going to go under as well for Vientos. Over under push is set at 2 for Harrison Bader steals. I'm going to push here, Joe. I love seeing Bader's aggressiveness on the base paths. And most importantly, he's getting on base where he's able to show off the speed.
I'll go under, but when we were talking about the offense earlier in the show, Harrison Bader's name didn't come up, of course, but he has had an offensive year that I don't think any Mets fans expected. When the Mets signed him, we talked about it, and a lot of people talked about it as this is a 4th outfielder, and Harrison Bader is not a 4th outfielder. He is a playable everyday center fielder, and I'll just go under on the steals because I think that's happenstance as to how many bases you'd get to steal.
I know they're waiting for Drew Gilbert in the system, and he's missed much of his season due to injury, but if Bader wants to come back on another 1-year deal, I would be all about it. But at this rate, if he stays healthy and keeps performing, Bader's going to get more than a 1-year deal. So good for him. Stearns has hit on a lot of these 1-year deals. It's really, really impressive. Over under push is at 7, Joe, for Francisco Lindor hits. Keep in mind, 7 games. The number is 7 for Lindor hits.
I'll push. I think he's just a different player in the leadoff spot, and his numbers leading off the game, it feels like every single day Lindor's hitting a double to start the game. That's just, that's not really true, but it sure feels that way. So I'll say he does a push.
It really does. Lindor has been so hot lately. The average, this is a guy that was hitting at 200 not that long ago.
Not even.
Not even. He's trying to get to 200. Now he's batting 247. The OPS is up to 746. I'm actually going to go under here because at some point he just has to cool off. And he'll get hot again. And I think Lindor will be more of a 260 kind of hitter this year with power. But at some point he has to cool off. I'll go under the 7 hits. Over under push is set at 2 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings. Joe, I'm gonna push here. I think the Mets can get out of 7 games. I think their starters can get to 6 innings at least twice. What do you like here?
Over. I think as we navigate this stretch of playing a baseball game every day without any off days, and 4 of these games they have to play down a reliever, I think Mendoza is going to be pushing his starters as long as they possibly can. And I think that you'll find a way through 6 innings 3 times in the next 7.
And a quick shout out to David Peterson, who, I mean, if you've
Yeah.
listened to this show long enough, you know how much Joe and I just were like, he's the great hope for us. We buy into David Peterson stock after every year, every injury, every spring training. Right now, though, Joe, he's gone at least 6 innings, 2 of his last 3 starts, and he's kept the runs down right now. And he's gone at least 6 innings, 3 of his last 5 starts. So if Peterson can be a guy that at least 60% of the time you're having him work into the 6th inning, that's a total game changer for a guy that's not expected to be a top 3 starter in this rotation right now. And this is, I mean, we've seen flashes of this from David Peterson before.
Yeah, we've seen flashes. Got to obviously find more consistency, but we will not quit David Peterson. I don't think we're allowed to.
Over under push is set at 4 for Mets wins here, Joe. Are you up on this one? Did I jump the gun already? I want to make sure.
I don't know.
You go. Peterson. I mean, we both usually align here.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to push. I think the Mets win 4 out of 7. I think they kind of keep their hovering a little above, getting a little above 500 ball. And listen, the Nationals are not, I want to make this clear and we've been guilty of it. Like, this is the weak part of the schedule. This is not the last 2 years of the Nationals. They have fight in them. If you're watching, you're seeing the young returns from the Soto trade. CJ Abrams, James Wood making his debut, really exciting outfielder, Mackenzie Gore starting. They have a lot of fight in them, but the Mets should be able to win out of 7 games, 3 against the Nationals, 4 against the Pirates, 4 games here, Joe.
Yeah, like you said, I was going to say a push too, so I guess the order of us going doesn't matter.
Never matters.
Yeah, but I think the Mets will keep on this train, I think, of being 500, a little above 500, and then hopefully in the few games before the All-Star break, they can rally off a few in a row and head into the All-Star break on a high a few games over.
Let's jump in and close out the show with your mailbag questions and comments. I have to start with a comment here, Joe. This is from Monk Axe B on YouTube. The no on the Vientos homers aged like an avocado. Just absolutely perfect.
Live show for you.
The show uploaded, and Vientos had probably hit 2 home runs already by the time most people had the podcast through their headphones. This is from a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, so big thanks to MSR Raven 108. I have a couple questions for Joe. How do you determine your prospect rankings? Is it their respective trade value? The Mets may have players whose values would be higher in other organizations. I'd start with Kevin Parada, considering Alvarez is in front of him. Is that a prospect that you'd be more willing to dangle at the deadline on the buy side? Joe, unfortunately, it's not been a good year at the plate for Parada again.
It has been a tough year for Kevin Parada, and I think I got a lot of grief for ranking him 12th in the system. I'm giving him 2 professional seasons to turn it around. So there's still a half of baseball left where Kevin Parada can turn it around. So I'm not ready to just, throw him down the list to 19 or something and act like he's a non-prospect. I'm willing to give him a little more time. And as far as how do I go about it, trade value doesn't have anything to do with it. Never really kind of makes it into my mind. But certainly, if there's a team that really wants Kevin Parada and you could get a player that you value for him, I'm not opposed to trading Kevin Parada away. I go through my rankings. I try to do my best to blend upside and floor. I don't want to make a list that is purely, these are the highest, like in order, the highest potential, because floor has to play in it too, because some of these guys with very high potential have a very low floor of not even being a major leaguer. And my hope is that when we look back at this list 2 years from now, 3 years from now, there's a bunch of big leaguers that were inside of my top 10, hopefully stars for the Mets, but the idea is to try to rank them a mix of upside and floor.
And to kind of support, your Parada standing right now. Last year, slow start in A-ball in Brooklyn, and then kind of turned it on. He finished with a 787 OPS in 87 games in Brooklyn as a 21-year-old. So age-wise, he's kind of right on the pathway. Yeah. He's not an old prospect. He's not a really young prospect. And then this year, starting out the year in Binghamton in Double-A ball, I mean, the OPS is 646. He's on base is under 300. His batting average is 209. He's hit 7 home runs. He's not obviously a base stealing threat. And we've talked about how his long-term home might not be catcher. So, if you go into next year as a 23-year-old starting in Binghamton again, the bottom line, like that, Joe, I'm not going to say he's not a prospect anymore, but the shine starts to wear off, unfortunately, no matter where you were drafted.
Yeah, the shine eventually wears off. Draft stats can only kind of keep you going for so long. But I'm willing to give him these next two and a half months or so. And then, we could reevaluate in the offseason. And who knows, as the question was there, it is certainly not out of the realm of possibility if the Mets are buyers that Kevin Parada could be a part of a deal later this month. And then we don't have to have this conversation next offseason.
Yeah, I think to the point, is he a guy that you can move on from in the system because of what else you have? The answer to me would be yes. All right, this one from Blazerman004 on YouTube. If Baty keeps hitting like Barry Bonds in AAA for the next few weeks, would he be somebody you can use to get a more high-end acquisition at the deadline? Maybe a package with him plus one of the other young arms we have in the minors, Vassell, Ziegler, Dom Hamill, etc. Sproat, Tong are off limits. For Mason Miller, the combination of Miller and Diaz in the back of the bullpen would be nasty. You wonder if you're taking a risk with Baty. However, with Vientos, Mauricio, Acuna, and Jet coming up, I think you can afford to move him in a deal of that nature. I also have faith we'll hit on at least a couple of these pitchers coming up as well. Joe, before I throw to you, because I've seen Mason Miller's name thrown around a lot, not for the Mets either, just also the Yankees as well. This guy is a young, very, very cost-controlled for a long time fireball reliever. I think the return is going to cost more, honestly. Like, I think proven prospect is what Mason Miller would cost. And we've talked about this a lot. The Mets are not in the standings of, hey, trade, like, foot on the gas for a reliever. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe.
No, I think Mason Miller is not getting traded number one because the price is going to be so crazy for a reliever. And it should be, like, perfectly justified. He has over 5 years of control. When Oakland, they'll eventually trade Mason Miller, but it'll be when his salary starts to rise in arbitration, and that's when Mason Miller will inevitably probably get dealt from Oakland. Right now, like a deal based around Baty and a Vassell or Hamill or something like that, I don't even know if they're even answering your phone call. They're probably hanging up on you. That, like, the cost is probably, man, I wouldn't be surprised if they're asking for at least 2 top 100 prospects to start a deal, because just the length of control and, the ability to be potentially one of the best relievers in the sport for half a decade, they're not just going to give it to you for maybe some guys that you don't really want to have around anymore. But the big picture talk of trading Brett Baty, I'm reluctant, and maybe I'm off base here, but what is happening at first base next year? Is Pete Alonso back? If he's not, does Mark Vientos move over to first base? And then third base is open. What if Ronnie Mauricio isn't right off of the ACL? We don't know for sure. I have no updates on, his status currently. What if he's not right? Then you don't have a third baseman to play, and you're going to have to go buy a third baseman because Brett Baty is not in the organization anymore. He is young enough, and I know it's been a struggle bus at the big leagues for him. We said the same exact thing about Mark Vientos. Obviously not the same exact sample size, but I find it hard to believe that Brett Baty could be this good in AAA and this poor at the major league level. There has to be a middle ground here. When people reference like 4A players and things like that, it's usually like you're really good at AAA and you're just okay at the major league level. It's here and here for Baty, like way up here and way down here. I think there's a middle ground still to be had, and I'm not ready to completely give up on him yet.
I'm with you, and you're right. This is the same combo we had about Vientos months ago. Literally the same, like selling low on a guy that is still young enough and is more valuable to your organization as depth than whatever throwaway you're getting back for him, right? Like, we don't think Baty brings back a legit piece for this ball club right now. So if you believe that, and you might not, which is okay, it's the Vientos combo all over again, where Brett Baty is adequate depth with upside for this organization. You don't just give away or sell low on adequate depth with upside. It's not like Jose Iglesias for a long time was viewed as infield depth in the minor league system, but he didn't have upside. He'd been around long enough that you kind of know like he could be a stopgap this year, and he's been incredible for this team, but we're not acting like Jose Iglesias is here for the next 6 years. So that's kind of the crux of that conversation. And he's more valuable to the Mets at the moment right now. Our last one, it's another 5-star review from Apple Podcasts. So thank you to CFGGFRT. Who are you willing to trade to make this team better in the second half, including prospects and current players in the lineup? It would have been nice to have won the series against the Astros. Sadly, the bullpen collapsed once again, giving up too many walks as usual. Who stays, who goes? Can we send McGill and Peterson to the bullpen and bring up Scott? Is that a fix? I mean, before I throw to you, Joe, my take is like Peterson is give him the runway as possible as a starter and look at the other guys as bullpen help right now. And we kind of hinted like prospects-wise, Joe, I mean, you could potentially see a guy like Parada moved, but they're not going to look to move any. Like, is there anyone in your top 10 from your 30 list on SNY.TV that you think could not be a Met in August? I don't.
It would be pretty surprising, to be honest, unless there's some big deal that I'm not thinking about that, maybe a Colin Houck could get moved in a deal. I don't know. But at this point, I think the Mets are going to be largely looking at trading at the margins, which is relief help, which is maybe an improved version of DJ Stewart, in the outfield. I know Mets fans are going to want them to make a big splash and want them to do the Yoenis Cespedes move of, 2015. I don't know if it's in the cards, especially with kind of what's going to be available at this deadline. Man, I think it's going to be a lot of trading from the middle to the back end of my top 30 and, acquiring some bullpen help. Ideally, you're trying to get, bullpen help that you could have beyond this year instead of a rental. Like that would be a dream scenario. I would love to see Pete Fairbanks from the Tampa Bay Rays if they fall out of it. And now that the Mets have David Stearns, I am completely unafraid of trading with Tampa Bay. I don't think David Stearns would succump to the whatever.
No trade with the Rays. Yeah.
Whatever hocus pocus the Rays have over there on other general managers throughout the sport. But Fairbanks is a name that I like a lot. But you have to be open-minded to lose things. That's the nature of the business. When you're sellers at the deadline, you have to be prepared to see your major league team get worse to improve your farm system. And when you're a contender trying to buy, you have to accept the fact that you're going to lose something from your prospect capital in order to improve the team. I just think it'll be nothing anywhere near the top of their list unless something, some opportunity that I don't see coming pops up.
Yeah, that's what it's going to come down to right now. I mean, you're not. We've talked about this with the Mets before. They are in a like you look at, and this is an easy comparison to make. This is just one man's opinion. Joe, I think the Yankees have to be all in on this year because they could say whatever they want and feel however they want. Nobody knows what Juan Soto is going to do in the offseason. He could go back to the Yankees, right? He could also go a lot of places because he's going to be arguably the biggest free agent baseball has ever seen. Like, that's a different timeline. The Mets right now, I mean, a lot of these guys that are a part of their success right now are going to be here next year or are somewhat replaceable in the near future that you're not going, well, if it's not this year, it's windows is what it is for the Mets right now. Like for the Mets right now, does it make sense to trade, say, Ryan Clifford and Brandon Sproat for a borderline closer, high leverage setup man? No, it doesn't. Like you don't trade those guys from your system right now. But for another team, Joe, that's something that they might consider because they view with their pending free agents and crunch that they have to really be foot on the gas this year. The Mets are in a weird spot. And I know this is dangerous to say because not all fans like to hear this. The Mets can kind of play it both ways if they want to right now.
You're right. And the Windows conversation, I think, is perfect. I don't think the Mets window has opened yet. Like, I don't think they're there yet. And
Alvarez is 22 years old.
Yeah, they may make it into the playoffs this year. I think that's a distinct possibility. But I don't think their window is opened yet because you've talked about the prospects in the system. They have young players that are on the verge of making their big league debut. You know, Luis Angel Acuna could be up this month. It wouldn't shock me. Drew Gilbert, if he were healthy, he would probably be up right now. So that means he's probably not too far away. Jet Williams working his way here. Christian Scott is coming back here on Wednesday. So the Mets have the young players coming. They have payroll opening up where they could be aggressive in free agency. I don't think their window's open yet. And like you said, there are some other teams who they really need to jump in on right now, because their team's going to look just a lot different a year from now.
All right, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch every single episode on SNY's YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe there to never miss a show. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.